Good morning, everyone. This week, Parshat Devarim, we start a new book of the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy. Devarim. That's Deuteronomy 1. And the week that we read it is a very unique Shabbos, particularly this year. Because this year, Shabbos will be Tish'a B'Av, the 9th of Av. Right, so the 9th of Av is considered the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. It is the day in which we mourn the destruction of the temples. And it's the most extreme version of mourning possible on Tish'a B'Av. We do many things on Tish'a B'Av, meaning on a regular year, Tish'a B'Av, we do many things that are highly irregular as a way of demonstrating our mourning and our sadness for the destruction of the temple. So, for example, think about Yom Kippur, which is the day in which we deny our luxuries and deny our pleasures by not eating or drinking, not putting on any lotions or oils as perfume or as to make ourselves feel good. We don't wash, we don't even wash our hands. We don't wear leather shoes on Yom Kippur, and husbands and wives avoid behaving as a married couple on Yom Kippur. So these are, and did I mention fasting? Yeah, we fast also for 25 hours, right? Which is the longest fast. Normally, the other fasts on the Jewish calendar begin in the morning, begin at sunrise, and this fast begins at sunset the day before. So that's very extreme. And the other fasts also, we only avoid eating or drinking. The other prohibitions are not in place. So Tish'a B'Av takes it even a step further. On Tish'a B'Av, Ashkenazi Jews in the morning don't wear tefillin. We only put on the tefillin in the afternoon. We also sit on a low stool, as mourners do. And we also don't study Torah during the first part of the fast. So these are signs of extreme mourning and extreme sadness. It's essentially the saddest day. It marks the low point of Jewish history. The 9th of Av. It remarks the low point of Jewish history by the destruction of the temples. It also marks the low point of Jewish history in the first approach to the land of Israel, where the spies returned from spying out the land of Israel and said that they couldn't, that we wouldn't be able to conquer it, and the children of Israel sort of threw up their hands and gave up on ever belonging in the land of Israel. And so that day was the 9th of Av, was Tish'a B'Av. And so it represents, the 9th of Av represents the loss of our spiritual connection to the land of Israel and to Jewish nationhood, because really the land of Israel is a symbol of Jewish nationhood. It's meaning a Jew can be a religious person in their own life, wherever. Right? There's nothing stopping a Jewish person from worshiping and serving God. The idea that we serve God as a community, however, and that we serve God not only in the moment, but in connection. So there are two components to community. One component is lateral and the other is linear. So laterally, we mean community is all the people in the current generation that you share this bond of community with, right? And linearly, we also have a sense that all the people that this community is one that comes from somewhere and is going somewhere. right? And so it's connected with family and history, right? That's essentially the two components. Now, family and history are associated with all happening in a certain place, right? So being a nation together, serving God as a community, not as an individual, but as a community, is comes to its culmination in the land of Israel, right? So where we have this place promised to us by God, a place where all of us as a community can be together, and where we can all cooperate in our service of God in a continuing and enduring way that also connects to our history. So the ninth of Av is a loss of those ideals, both the idea that we give up hope of going to Israel, as well as the destruction of the temple, which represents the focal point of the land of Israel. The temple is kind of the catalyst that turns our communal life into communal worship, right? If you think about it, the temple is where we as a community all offer up our service to God as a community. Because again, an individual can pray anywhere. But in order for us to pray as a community, we have to have a shared space in which we all worship together. So the temple is that shared space. Actually, the Midrash says that even today, all of our prayers first go to the place of the temple, and then they go up to heaven, which is kind of perhaps suggesting that even as today, as we pray without that temple, without that shared space, because of the idea of the temple, we are all nonetheless praying as a community. This is the Baal Shem Tov says, that our prayers first go to the Kotel before they go up to heaven. And so in a sense, every time we pray, we're praying all together. So we have to realize that when we're praying, we're also praying for those who are not praying. Or together with, right, we're praying with everyone. Yeah? You have a thought? No?
Just that when you read the prayers, you realize they're not just praying for yourself; they're praying for all Jews.
Right. The language of the prayer is always in the possessive. It's in the plural possessive. We. Yeah. Us. Yeah. Yeah. Hear our voice. Yeah. Now, so that's part one. Okay. Part two is that to this specific Tish'a B'Av. So this Tish'a B'Av falls on Shabbos. So in a way, it's very strange to observe Tish'a B'Av on Shabbos, and in fact, we don't. The fast is postponed to Sunday. Nonetheless, it still is Tish'a B'Av. It's still the 9th of Av. The day is still the day, and the energy is still there. The energy of what that day represents is still there. It's observed in some sense. There are certain aspects of mourning that are observed, even though it's Shabbos. So I'll make the point for the halachic edification, but that's not my point. So practically speaking, our custom is that private matters of mourning are still observed. So the invisible mourning is still observed. So we have an obligation to eat on Shabbos, so we eat and drink on Shabbos, right? But on Shabbos afternoon, for example, which normally, okay, this is already observing the next day. Pretty much the only thing that we don't do on Shabbos is that a husband and wife don't behave as a married couple on Shabbos when it's Tish'a. But otherwise, everything else is observed in the normal way. Shabbos is observed in the normal way. The other exception is that at the end of Shabbos, the fast begins before Shabbos ends. Right, so the last hour of Shabbos, from the time the sun sets until the stars come out, we don't eat. And at that point, we also don't study Torah from the afternoon of Shabbos. So that's another thing that we wouldn't do on a normal year, on the afternoon before Tish'a B'Av. Why don't we study Torah?
Because it's a pleasure.
It's our joy, right?
From the afternoon on.
From the afternoon before Tish'a B'Av on, yeah.
Not in this case, not until the end of Tish'a B'Av, the actual Tish'a B'Av.
Right. So in this case, normally it's on the 8th of Av in the afternoon that we stop studying. This year it'll be on the 9th of Av in the afternoon because we're observing the fast on the 10th. Right. So that's Saturday afternoon we'll stop studying Torah. I think that the idea that Torah is a pleasure, I'd like to think about it for a moment in terms of symbolic in symbolic terms. If the study of Torah at all is meant to be remember, look at it from a holistic point of view for a moment, right? So we're talking about what it is to be worshiping God as a community, right? And we're saying that the ultimate worship of the individual is that they are part of this community that's worshiping God in context of the community, and that's both in view of our history, as well as in view of our future, as well as in view of all the other people of our generation that are joined together in that work. And the temple and the land of Israel are both symbols. The temple is the symbol of our community. The land of Israel is a symbol of our communal space, and the temple is the symbol of the place in which we all worship together. Yeah. So. So now when the temple is destroyed, if we're ignoring the fact that the temple is destroyed and instead working on our study of Torah, so that's a hollow study of Torah. So I didn't see this written anywhere, but it seems to me obvious that that's the meaning. That the delight of the study of Torah is that it is the whole purpose of the study of Torah is so that it drives us, it informs and guides the service of God, and the ultimate service of God is that which is done in community. And so on the day that we're commemorating the destruction of the temple, if we distract ourselves from the study of from thoughts about the destruction of the temple and directing our attention towards rebuilding it, or towards correcting the problems that created the context in which it was destroyed, then we're studying Torah actually in a cynical way. Yeah, you hear about it? It makes sense.
No, I'm thinking about it, and I guess that's right. Like almost in vain.
Yeah. So we have to look at the idea of what is delight. Why specifically what the meaning of the word delight is. So that's perhaps something to think about and understand a little more. But those are my thoughts on that. Now, in general, so I mentioned this. This year we observed both the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, the beginning of the 3 weeks. We observed it on Shabbos as well, or the fast was on Shabbos and postponed to Sunday. So there's some. Let's think for a moment about why we're fasting at all, right? What is the fast of Tish'a B'Av? What's the point of commemorating the destruction of the temple?
To taken to make real for us the tragedy
No.
of the destruction of the temple.
Is that healthy? To be wallowing in sadness for 2,000 years?
Well, when you mourn
I guess so.
somebody, it's not going to bring them back either, but it's still mourn.
Right. So that's an excellent example, excellent analogy. So the observance of Tish'a B'Av is similar in a way to the observance of Shiva, the way we observe Shiva or the way we observe Aninus, where we sit on a low stool and we don't wear leather shoes. We refrain from washing and those kinds of things. A lot of parallels between the mourning. Do we observe those observances each year on the yard side of the death? We don't, right? As a matter of fact, in some communities, it's even customary to have a meal, right? To have a family meal and a get together, and even with simcha each year on the yard side. In Kabbalistic tradition, when we celebrate the yard side of a tzaddik, of a righteous person, that is the anniversary of death of a righteous person, it's called a hilula. Hilula means you could hear it, it's an onomatopoeia almost. Hilula is the Aramaic word for celebration or a wedding. You could hear the ululating. Yeah, you know what is ululating?
Do women do it only,
Yeah,
or men do it too?
generally it's the women who do it, yeah.
Like a yodeling.
Yeah. It's in Eastern communities, they do that in celebration. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah? Should I play you a sound clip? I'll play you a sound clip.
It's like American Indians. Oh.
Yeah. Universal, huh?
Here. Yeah, you hear that?
Oh.
Okay.
Here we are at JP Sharifa's.
Okay. You never heard of that before?
No,
In Eastern communities, that's how they celebrate, by doing that. So the word hilula perhaps captures some of that spirit. Yeah. So a yard side of a tzaddik, that commemoration of the specifically Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is referred to, his yard side is referred to as a hilula. Right. So how do we get onto that? Oh, so I was saying that each year on the yard side, we don't necessarily observe mourning. Right. Some communities actually fast. Yeah. Okay. So we remember their life, but we're not mourning each year.
Yeah, but
Right.
we remember their lives, what they did for us,
Okay.
and how we can remember them now.
All right. So in a way, my question is, why are we? What is this? What is the sense in fasting each year on Tish'a B'Av? So Betty points out that we when we remember somebody who passed away, we remember them each year. That's true. We remember them each year, but we don't wallow in sadness each year, right? It's not as that's true. Some people do fast there is such a thing as a Tanis yard site. That's true. That is true.
So it must be a combo. Combo of joy and well, I've felt it on just in when the family gets together to the death of somebody. Oh, I haven't seen you in a long time. There's a joyousness for me. In
Weddings and funerals, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Weddings, funerals, of bar mitzvahs. Yeah, yeah.
You know what they say? Tell them that a wedding takes precedence over a funeral, because at a funeral you only bury one.
Ooh. Ooh. How would it say that a man who is not married is incomplete, and once he's married, he's finished? So where were we? So the question is, why are we fasting on Tish'a B'Av? What's the point of fasting? So we can remember, but the idea that fasting, and specifically with such intense mourning, is in a way, from a mental health point of view, from an emotional health point of view, we would say that they're stuck and they haven't moved on. They don't have acceptance. Oh, so why do we have to remember? What's the point of
So that we can
remembering?
rebuild.
So that we can rebuild, right? So here,
You can what?
so we can rebuild, right? Implicit in the remembering is that there's something still to remember. There's some forward-looking purpose in remembering.
And how about, and so possibly we can avoid the same thing from occurring
Good,
again.
exactly. Good, same thing. I would say that that's the idea is that there's something forward-looking about our memory. It's not only looking back. If it's only looking back, then all right, we look back. So, in a sense, the fast of Tisha B'Av is a profoundly hopeful statement because it says that it's not over. If it's over, if it would be over, then we would accept it and move on. And there are many things that we have accepted and moved on. Right? That Midrash says that Gezerah al Hametz shenishtachach min halev. When someone passes away, it's inevitable that they'll be forgotten. And that, well, that's a fact.
Yeah, but you don't forget them.
Well, eventually you do. You don't remember them in the same way. The specific example is that Jacob mourned his son Joseph for 22 years, right? And he refused to be comforted, right? So the rabbi said the fact that he refused to be comforted is a sign that Joseph was still alive. Because if Joseph would have actually been dead, by 22 years, it's not the same anymore. You may still remember fondly, you may still remember with sadness, but there is a sense of it isn't the same 22 years later. But for Jacob, it was the same 22 years later. He refused to be comforted.
We hadn't had the completion experience in seeing the body or in
Right, he didn't have closure. Yeah. And so the idea though that the fact that one continues mourning is that when a person truly passes away and one goes through the process of mourning, there's a certain amount of acceptance that's expected. That's normal and healthy. Right? We mourn for a certain amount. Of course, we're not saying you forget them completely, but it doesn't stay in the heart in the same way. And the language in the rabbinic literature is shenishtachach min halev. It's forgotten from the heart, so it doesn't have that same intensity. Yeah, Betty.
But when mourn somebody in the family, it's one thing. When we mourn on Tish'a B'Av, we're mourning not only the destruction of the temple, but everything that happened to us. When Abe was a little boy before the war, he asked the rabbi, why do we fast on, Tish'a B'Av and all that? And he said, not only for the temple destruction, but for everything that happened to us since.
Right.
And that was before the war.
There was
now
still
we
more
have-
things to mourn. Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
more things to mourn.
Yeah. And so
it's a continuing process. I mean, somebody dies in the family, it's one thing, but this is a continuing process.
yeah.
And for 2 or 3 weeks throughout our history, a lot of things have gone wrong.
Yes.
Other than
Yes. So I want to take a step back from that for a moment also and say that, look, every people has had terrible and disastrous things happen to them. The Jewish people are not unique in our suffering. Then we don't have to go and compare. We don't have to have a pity party and compare who's had a worse history than who. Normal nations go through suffering. Hopefully, again, a sign of health in a nation is that you can be resilient and you can move forward from your suffering and not be stuck in wailing and bemoaning all the troubles that you've been through. Right? It's a new day, and you know what? Going forward, we know that bad things are going to happen to us again, but that doesn't stop us. It doesn't restrict us from living today. And this is a very important principle in mental and emotional health, is that we have to be able to be resilient and recover from that which happened to us in the past. We have to be able to live fully in the good moments and not be paralyzed by the anticipation of the bad moments which will inevitably come. Right? We're all going to die. That's a fact, right? There's going to be sadness in our life. We're going to have frustration. I mean, these are inevitable, right? So we're not making light of it. It's an important balance. We're not making light of it. But at the same time, so it means we take it seriously, but at the same time, we can't let it paralyze us, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking to myself, wait a minute, somebody told me that part.
Right. So why then, as a Jewish people, are we dedicating a day to kvetch about all the things that went wrong with us as a people? Right. But I think that actually the mourning and the fact that we associate it with Tisha B'Av, the fact that in traditional Judaism, right, this is a difference between Yom HaShoah and Tisha B'Av. Yom HaShoah is very important and all that, but there's something much more powerful, symbolic about bringing the mourning of the Holocaust into the mourning for the temple and into the mourning for the night of wailing with the spies, which is to say, we're not crying because someone did something bad to us. And we're not crying because we lost people or because people were brutal, discriminated, oppressed, etc. We're crying because these days of sadness, these experiences of suffering are terrible in that they represented stopping us from actualizing our full potential. So the destruction of the temple is not bad because we lost our sticks and stones. It's because we lost a certain mode of worship. The death of so many righteous and holy people is sad because of the loss of life, but that's not unique to us. It's not even unique. Meaning, it's not. I'm not trying to trivialize death, but death is one per person, right? And even untimely, tragic, and brutal death is terrible, and that happens. And I'm not trivializing it all, but that's not what Tisha B'Av is. Tisha B'Av is not about brutality. It's not about shuddering from brutality. It's about thinking who we lost and what they meant to us and what we're missing now that they're not here. That we were exiled from Israel is not terrible because we no longer have the comforts of living in a place that everyone is like us. It's because there's something about our destiny that's incomplete when we're not in Israel as a Jewish people with prosperity and the ability to actualize our ideals. Right. So this is a religious commemoration, and it's an expression of being rededicated. So if the project were over, then Tisha B'Av would be a pointless exercise in futility and would be an unhealthy wallowing in grief and being stuck in the past. But because the project is still on, Tisha B'Av is a profound expression of rededication to what we're all about in the most fundamental way. And it says that we're not letting go of that because it's all about being who we're meant to be in the land of Israel with a built temple together as a Jewish people.
And isn't it also a reminder of what happens when we don't follow?
Oh, so you're saying it's a reminder of what happens when we don't follow God's teaching, right? And I'll just put that I'll flip that around. Again, the relevance. I don't know if you realize what you're saying. The notion that we suffer as a people when we're not listening to God, connecting those two is exactly making the same point, which is that when we get away from the program, it's about getting away from the program. It's about getting away from the project. The Jewish people throughout history have been working on a project. And when we get away from that project, right, Tisha B'Av is a meditation on what it is to get away from that project, both by our actions and both by the things that happen to us.
Do all the Jewish holidays remind us of our project?
I would say yes, because anything Jewish is part of that project.
Yeah, but it's also a day that we don't do our usual things, so it's a day that we think more of what we are meant to be doing.
Yes, absolutely. And but the every yontif, every Jewish holiday, every mitzvah, every Jewish practice is designed in some way either to be a meditation on what we're meant to be doing, or it's the act of doing what we're meant to be doing. Right, so that goes to our daily prayers, that goes to our observance of Shabbos, that goes to our observance of Yontif, that goes to the observance of Jewish family life. It goes to all of these things are a part of this process to fulfill the Jewish. What is the Jewish project? It's to create a God consciousness, a world that is filled with godly consciousness. So to reveal that every aspect of the world, every aspect of life, every aspect of society is connected with God's will and is a creation of God to demonstrate how it's filled with the presence of God. That is the Jewish project. Bayom hahu yihiyeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. On that day, God's name will be one. God will be one and his name will be one. That is, that we'll see how there is no dichotomy. There's no conflict in this world. Everything is one. Everything is God. And there's no opposition to God in this world. Everything is fulfillment of God's will. And that's, of course, an exercise in building the structures and the infrastructure of this world to be consistent with God's will. And it also means directing our consciousness to be aware of God's presence. And the two are mutually supportive of each other. So, so now Shabbos, Tisha B'Av on Shabbos. So now, all of the features of Tisha B'Av that are mourning and sadness are suspended for Shabbos. But all of the underlying principles of hope and this context, which means that we're still holding on to the project. And actually, Tisha B'Av, in a way, is the day in which we're more focused on the project than any other day of the year. It's the day that we're most fixated on what we're really meant to be doing as Jews, is Tisha B'Av. And so this Shabbos is, so the only thing, so in a way, sometimes we lose the forest for the trees, right? So on Tisha B'Av, we can become so upset, become so fixated on the mourning and on the sadness, on the upsetness and on the halachas and on the laws of mourning and all, don't wash your hands until the knuckles, right? And your chair is 10 inches high. It really should be, right, not 11 inches high, right? So we have to get fixated on these things. And sometimes we lose the point of what we're trying to do, right? Of course, it's very easy to forget what we're trying to do if you don't have the things to ground you, right? So I'm not belittling the minutia. It's very important, as we've discussed many times. But nonetheless, the purpose of all of these things, of all of these observances, is to bring us to this consciousness, to this awareness of what we're doing here, which we're supposed to be thinking about the Jewish project and where we are with that, and rededicating ourselves to that project. So Shabbos is a day in which we're completely dedicated to the project, and we're not restricted by the mourning. And we can really be, it's a very holy Shabbos. And in a sense, Shabbos is the day of godly consciousness, right? Because on Shabbos, why do I say that Shabbos is a day of divine consciousness? Because on a normal day, we fix things, right? Fixing things means that you recognize a dichotomy. You recognize a conflict. This thing is broken. This thing doesn't, let's say, if we're thinking of everything in the spiritual point of view, this thing doesn't express a God consciousness. This thing isn't consistent with God's will. It needs to be fixed. We have to do some tikkun olam here, right? It has to be fixed in order to represent this divine consciousness, which during the week we're manifesting the sense of dichotomy, the sense of conflict that the world doesn't reflect, because there are things in the world that don't yet reflect God's identity, God's consciousness, right? On Shabbos, however, we don't fix anything, right? So Shabbos is so of course on Shabbos we know that tomorrow is going to be Sunday, but nonetheless it's a me'ein olam haba. It's a foretaste of the world to come, of the other world, of the God consciousness world. So so this Shabbos of Tish'a B'Av is one in which we can be completely dedicated to the symbolism, the holiness of what our rededication to the Beis Hamikdash, to the temple, and to the Jewish project, to our divine work is, without the sadness and mourning that can sometimes get in the way a little bit. Of course, it's not to get in the way, but we're in a way we can kind of be there. Now, practically speaking, there's some features of Shabbos that are uniquely poised to do this, and that is the meals of Shabbos. So the rabbis tell us, the Talmud says, that when Mashiach comes, when the world reaches its perfection, there will be a great feast in which we'll eat the Leviathan fish and the Shor Habar, the giant ox. This is the mystical tradition. So the idea that so when we have our Shabbos meals, we might meditate on perhaps what it might be like to have the feast that will be at the coming of the Mashiach, at the fulfillment of when we reach the goal. It's also represented in the Torah reading that we'll read this Shabbos. And actually, not only this Shabbos, but all the Parshat, all the Torah readings of the 3 weeks have this feature, that it talks about entering the land of Israel and conquering the land of Israel, which means causing the area to be consistent with our project. That's what conquering means. Page 738, Deuteronomy 1, verse 8.
Is there some place in the Torah where God talks about the people who are being displaced and being killed off? just from the modern liberal point of view, you wanna think about the ones you are sending out. What did they do wrong? How did they deserve this displacement?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Well, they said
Huh?
God told the Israelites to attack because these people try to get them into idolatry. That was like vengeful. And,
So I hear your question is saying there are Canaanite nations in the land of Israel, and we're coming and conquering this land. And how do we justify doing that when there are people living there? And what happens to them, right? Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely painful.
Are there passages where reasons are given, or is that too?
The only reason that's given is that that they will be that they would cause us to worship idols. So if you look at the end of the last parsha,
And they have tried the courses too, right? You say there was the what's that?
well, that's certainly our experience has been that the Midianites, yeah. If you want to look back,
But they are on the other side of the Yarden, so I don't know
correct.
if they're part of this.
Let's see if I can find the.
It's not given a lot of space.
Right.
Not a lot of excuses.
Here we have. You know what? Let's look back at page 716, Numbers 33, verse 50.
Verse 50.
Okay. And the Lord spoke unto Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel and say to them, When you pass over the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. Destroy all their figured stones, and destroy all their molten images, and demolish all their high places. You shall drive out the inhabitants of the land and dwell therein, for unto you I have given the land to possess it. Skip 54, 55. But if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those that you shall let remain of them shall be as thorns in your eyes, and as pricks in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land wherein you dwell. And it shall come to pass that as I thought to do unto them, so will I do unto you. So there is this idea that there is a certain corruption among the Canaanite nations, that they're so so immersed in idol worship that they're beyond salvation.
they're inhospitable people also. They're not welcoming and kind.
So this is certainly it seems, it grates on the modern ear, definitely. And I'll say that, though, that I had a conversation recently about Queen's politics. Yesterday, officially, Tiffany Caban conceded to Melinda Katz.
Yeah.
Tiffany Caban, who was they were both running for district attorney, and Tiffany Caban was a far left liberal who was on a platform of criminal justice reform, and talking about her platform was all the things that she's not going to prosecute, and all the things that she's going to, all the ways in which she's going to be lenient on crime. I have to take this call. Hello? Yes, Tony. Okay, wonderful. So come to the address that I gave you, and the lady in the office will give you the check. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Um. So anyway, so she was running on this platform of all the things that she's going to
Excuse.
all the things that she's going to be lenient on it, and the underpinning of this idea is that and part of her the rhetoric that you hear is that black and brown people have been criminalized, and that it's racist, that our criminal justice system is racist because we criminalize black and brown people. And certainly, look, I'm not denying that there's evidence that there's such a thing called getting pulled over for driving while black, and that there is a there is a higher instance of people who get a stricter sentencing for people who are black than people who aren't. And
a lot of that is economic.
so right. So one of the issues is the cash bail issue, right? But I don't want to drill down on those data points, which certainly there's room to do that and to understand why that's the case. Are there any causes for that besides racism? But there's a whole other conversation that we're not having, and that is number one, just to the big picture of the thing. Of course, there's a place for criminal justice reform, and of course, there's a place for fighting for compassion amidst the justice system. But that's the place of the public defender, of the defense, the role. That's the role of the defense attorneys. The role of the district attorney, the role of prosecution, is to prosecute criminals, and you don't put the fox in the henhouse, right? So that essentially, it's. I have the utmost respect for people that are fighting for compassion and for equality and reform within the justice system. But at the same time, there has to be somebody who's fighting for justice and fighting for the rules. And so Tiffany Caban and the things she talked about were very important and need to be given serious contemplation. But to lose a district attorney to that, so now who loses out? So this is the other point, which is that the people who voted for her, and of course I'm in a stereotype here, but largely you're talking about a lot of young millennials, people who are living in privileged areas, tend on the wealthier side, tend to be college educated, college graduates, which means that they are privileged. And they have the privilege of saying, oh, don't criminalize people, because they've never faced a real criminal. They have the luxury when there are people who are living in real communities where they're suffering from real crime, and they don't have the luxury of being of talking about reform when they're literally worried about getting shot. They're worried about getting shot by police, but they're all worried about getting shot by their neighbors, right? So this issue of criminal justice reform comes from a place of luxury.
Except when it comes to things like having a little bit of marijuana on you, which they also prosecute at the highest extent.
Yeah,
for the
okay.
brand.
So again,
But again, that's
that-
who you can afford for your lawyer. And if you're a
Yeah.
poor white kid,
You
and
can
the
afford
same
the
thing
lawyer.
happened. No, I said if you're a poor white kid, you're probably going to get the same justice as the black kid who's poor, only because you can't afford a good
okay, so we have to drill
lawyer.
down on the data. It's not we're arguing on things that can really be identified, right? The point, right? You're making a reasonable point, and we can track down the data. I'm sure that it's possible also to see what does the DA ask for in this case, and what does the DA ask for in that case? And maybe his initial ask in the case of a black kid would be harsher than the initial ask on the white kid. It's also possible that he's anticipating that he's going to have to fight with a lawyer, and therefore he has a more reasonable ask. Right? These are all real real things that we can sort through. But nonetheless, the criminal justice reform, the activism for criminal justice reform that seeks to remove strong prosecution is something that is completely privileged, that somebody could think that way. Because if you live in a neighborhood where your life is at risk because of criminals, then actually you might also be worried about being criminalized yourself. But at the same time, you understand that a strong prosecution is literally life-saving. So how do we get onto this from getting rid of the Canaanites, right? So in our modern privileged worldview, it's very hard for us to imagine people who are beyond salvation. You talk to people who are in the criminal justice world. I talk to police officers and parole officers, etc., and they will tell you, it's something that I've heard from them directly, that many people can be worked with, but there is a small percentage of the population that are unfortunately beyond salvation, and the only thing you could do is lock them up. That's all you can do. So we in our modern world live in a way shielded from, especially in America, we live shielded from this notion that there are people that need to be removed, that there are people that are beyond help, and that survival requires brutality sometimes. So again, I just want to remind you that I said at the beginning that it does hurt to read this, and it is uncomfortable for me. On the other hand, I recognize what I don't know, and that's simply what it is. The other point is, and this is just something that we need to think through, which is, what are we doing here as Jews, right? If we have a Jewish project, then we have to see our project through. And that which gets in the way of our project, we have to identify, right? Is this something that can be leveraged in the project or not? Yeah, please, thank you. Can it be leveraged in the project? And that's it. Now, I this is the one question that I'm going to leave you with that I haven't answered myself, which is, if I say that there's the whole Jewish project is to show that there's no dichotomy and there's no conflict between God and the world. So ultimately, we have to say that at some point, these nations will have to be brought in some way also, right? That's the end. That's the end game. Okay, so I have to see. That's a question that I'm leaving unresolved. That's definitely a flaw that needs to be resolved. To conclude, though, we read in Numbers 1, verse 7, page 738. Turn you and take your journey, go to the hill country of the Amorites, and unto all the places near thereto, in the land of Arava, in the hill country and lowland, the south by the seashore land of Canaanites, and Lebanon, as far as the Gold River, the Euphrates. Behold, I have set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which the Lord swore unto your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, to Jacob, to give to them and their seed after them. Right. So this is the theme that we're reading about in on Tish'a B'Av in Shul, which is the dedication to the promise to go into the land of Israel and to take it on and to be who we're meant to be and to live out our lives fully as to create this communal space that's connected to history and future, and all focused on the temple, on the service of God, and dedicating ourselves to fulfilling his will.